While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are approaching or are already in retirement, you've tuned into iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, along with the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Brynsma. Please check us out online, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org. Nobody wants to feel lonely during their retirement, so it's important to recognize your feelings and take steps to increase your quality of life wherever you can. Incorporating new habits, a deeper spiritual walk, resulting in a fresh outlook on life. All of that will help you feel less isolated and alone after you leave the workforce. Your retirement years can be the best years of your life. But you got to keep your eyes on the Lord. Be honest with yourself when you're struggling with loneliness. Maintain a positive mindset and embrace this new era of life with all of its uncertainties. It's a gift of time that's yours to treasure, should you choose to do so. Today we embark on part 2 of a 3-part series entitled Loneliness in Retirement. Today we're going to focus on solutions for overcoming loneliness in retirement and all out avoiding it entirely. It's going to be a fantastic series, already started a couple weeks ago. Bruce Brynsma, welcome back to iRetire4Him.
Jim, I really loved our conversation a couple of weeks ago, and this will build on that, and the one next week will build on that, because it is such a, loneliness is such a critical issue. As a matter of fact, most of the research shows that the issues in aging, in that whole 30-year period, whether you're moving into the first stage, second stage, third stage, that loneliness is the heart of a problem that has rabbit trails, has tentacles that extend everywhere. And so we're talking about a heart issue that is a key issue that needs to be understood and addressed in order to be able to live that life of meaning and purpose that we all want, and to fill that hole, that vacant hole that's in the middle of us.
Well, that vacant hole can only be filled by one thing, and that's Jesus. And most of the people listening to today's show are already have Jesus, but it doesn't mean that they're totally healed and totally living in freedom. And this loneliness can be one of those things that the enemy can use to put a damper on all of life. Why don't we just go back and just summarize quickly, Bruce, what we talked about on our podcast a couple weeks ago about loneliness and retirement, and what are some of the signs, and then we're going to focus the rest of the show on talking about solutions to loneliness.
I think, first of all, it's important to understand that loneliness, while it has physical manifestations, the key part to loneliness, the most important thing to understand, is that loneliness is a state of mind. And it's linked to wanting human contact, but feeling alone and being either unable or unwilling to take a step out of the loneliness trap and into the relationship, and into relationships. So, people can be in the midst of a crowd and be alone. They can have contact with people and still experience loneliness. There's just a whole series of things that we'll talk about that we can do to overcome it. But just realize that it is a state of mind. Therefore, at some level, there is a choice involved.
So let's talk about that. As we focus on solutions to loneliness, what are your friends saying to you about how they overcame loneliness in retirement? I think you've got stories up your sleeves all the time. Tell us one of those stories.
I was talking with a woman actually earlier this morning, and she is 87. 12 years ago, she and her husband moved from where they had lived all their lives and where their kids were to a nice town where they thought they wanted to be. He died 2 years later. So she has been a widow in a new town for now 10 years. As we were chatting this morning, I said to her, so what was the most difficult part of that? And what advice would you give someone who was making that transition? And it was fascinating what she said. She said, Bruce, I don't regret the decision that we made to move, but I didn't understand what we were leaving behind and how difficult it was going to be, particularly as a widow. When my husband was here, we had some places of connecting. When he died, they tended to disappear. And so I have had to work really, really, really hard to be able to find those relationships in this new area. I said, so have you been successful? And I think her honest answer was partially. I said, well, what do you do when you're feeling alone? She says, I just have the most direct conversations with God you can imagine. I just tell him, we got to do some stuff today because I'm not feeling good. And I said, well, how does he answer? She says, he always gets me going. And then sometimes I don't like what we're doing. And so I just talk to him and he talks to me. And that's for me, that was her answer to loneliness. I said, so how often do you have these conversations? Oh, yeah. Once a day, sometimes every other day. I said, how long do they go on? She says, yeah, we do it most of the morning. And so, on the one hand, you chuckle and you go, oh my goodness. On the other hand, you go, she has taken an action, made a decision to find a friend in Jesus and to be her friend in her way. And I just thought that was encouraging. I thought it was very healthy. And it may not be the way that you would express your relationship that way. We go, the other thing she said, did you know what's my lifeline? I said, what's that? She says, my telephone. She says, because all my friends that I have not here, I can still stay in touch with them. I said, well, does it ever bother them that you're calling them a lot? She says, no, I'm sensitive to that. I get it. I understand. But she said, for me to be able to pick up the phone and call Sally for a 20-minute conversation helps. I said, so the key is the decisions that you are making in order to deal with what might be a very lonely situation. I said, you're exactly right. You got to decide to take some action. Some of them may be a little unusual, but they work for her in this case.
Did she share with you why she didn't just choose to move back near her kids?
I asked her that. I said, well, why don't you move back by her children's names? She said, my sense is we have a good relationship, but that it would have been too close and I would have been too needy. And they don't need me to be needy in their life. I want to support them. So if, they need me to come over and, go back to the town and take care of their kids while they got to be gone or something, I'm happy to do any of that. But I also didn't want to be a burden on them. Well, her health is starting to go down. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the next stages of life, because this loneliness has different dimensions, whether you're 60 and they're quite different than when you're 75, and then they're quite different again when you're 85.
I love the fact that she was honest with you. She just shared from her heart what was really going on. And that's pretty powerful.
That is very powerful.
Yeah. Do you find that most of your retired friends are really in touch with their emotions and are making decisions based on dealing with those emotions? Or, how do you find your friends dealing with those emotions?
I think ignore and anger, I think, are way too common. They either don't want to admit that there's an issue, and so they cover it up, and there may be drinking or other kinds of ways that they're dealing with with that loneliness, or anger about it. And they take that anger out on sometimes on their kids, on their friends, on whatever. It is their fault that I feel the way I do. And so that is so hard. And as those of us that have found ways to be able to deal with those changing relationships, be able to find ways to love and support them is part of our responsibility. But they have a role in it also, although often, it's much easier to point fingers than it is to take responsibility.
Yeah, yes, it is. But when we point a finger, there's three pointing back at us. You're listening to iRetire4Him as we talk about solutions to loneliness and retirement. We'll be right back with more conversation with Bruce after we hear from a very fantastic guest here in our second segment. We'll be right back.
The Retirement Reformation wants to come alongside you as you navigate in each stage of your retirement. Our online resources include our blog, our downloadable books, and life planning studies, as well as membership and coaching options. Go to retirementreformation.org and use these resources to begin the transformation of your retirement. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for Him. That's retirementreformation.org. Now, back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. Bruce, every second segment of every show, we always bring on a special guest to share their story. Who do you have for us today?
Well, Jim, we've got a special guest from on the other side of the ocean. That would be the Atlantic Ocean, to the country of my heritage. And I'd like to introduce our listenership to Saskia van Helden. Saskia, welcome. We're so glad that you're with us today.
Thank you, Bruce. It's my privilege. I'm looking forward.
God has ways of bringing different people together in order to carry out plans that He has for us. And it's always fascinating to our audience to be able to understand the journeys that others have been on. And so you've been on a journey for just a number of years. And so give us just a little bit of your background. And so that will position us to understand a little bit more about, in another segment, we'll talk about your ministry in some detail. But now tell us a little bit about Saskia and how God has worked in your life.
Okay, thank you. I will. As Jim told, I'm born in the Netherlands in a Christian family. And I'm the second daughter in my family. And my parents, they were used to start praying at the moment my mom was knowing that she was pregnant. So it was very early for me to have a praying mom. And I think that's been a blessing for me in my whole life. And when I was born and they discovered it was a daughter again, they gave me a second name. My first name is Deodate. That means it's a Latin name. It means gift from God. And for my parents, their baby, their newborn baby, was a gift from God. But in my life, I've changed that interpretation a bit, like my life is a gift from God. And that's like a motto in my life, that I know that God is with me and that I have lived life with a praying mom and a praying dad.
Wow. And where in the Netherlands were you born and were you raised?
I'm raised in Zwolle. It's a bit in the middle of the country. And sometimes people call it like a Christian city, the most Christian city of the Netherlands, because we have many churches in our city, and we have Christian education centers. So I hope that some of the love of God through the Christians in our city is visible in our city, in social welfare and economic welfare.
And so continue on with a bit of your life story. Where did you go to school, and what were some of the key things, maybe the two or three things that really influenced you in the direction of your life, knowing that God has a plan for you?
I think at the age of 12, I read a book from a Zwolse woman named Betty Smith. She, as a young girl, she went to Brazil and to bring the gospel to the Indian people. And I was very much impressed by her story, by her adventure, by her courage to go into the rainforest and leave everything behind that was about well-being. So Betty Smith was about kind of role model for me, and I still have her book here. I like to read it. And the second part is that in our church, we had quite some programs about uh, uh, prayer education and Bible education. And not only for children within our church, but also within the city, like Bible schools, holiday Bible schools, probably you know them. And as a young teenager, I was involved. And I raised like a natural way of doing that and joining it. So I think that's very, that was part of my education. And later on, as a student, we went to campsite to bring the gospel. So, yeah, I was used to be involved in evangelism.
For our audience to know that the Netherlands was one of the key countries in the Reformation, and that the Christian religion was critical to the development of the country. But over the years, it has reversed. And so as of a few years ago, the number of admitted Christians in the country was under 5%. And so the town of Zwolle and the ministries that have come out of that are bright shining lights in a very dark world. What is God saying to you about the growth of Christianity and those that will follow Christ in your country?
You mean after the century ahead, like the modern devotion?
And what's coming ahead?
Sorry, Bruce, you have to ask the question again. I do not understand
I
quite.
can do that. How do you see God working in the Netherlands to be able to change the culture from now it is very unchristian, having once been Christian, and now to be able to draw it back closer to Jesus?
Well, there are some developments that will influence our developments. I think the final development, the lockdown because of COVID, has opened our eyes about what faith and being a Christian really means. If it's just a way of being a cultural Christian and having a tradition of going to church or whatever, or is it something of your heart and being a follower of Jesus Christ? I think we get a kind of separation after COVID about who really wants to continue as a church member, as a follower of Jesus, or who has made other plans and other decisions, not only on Sunday, but also during the week. That's one development. Another strong development in our country, and especially my husband is involved, is that we have many migrants coming from Asia, coming from Africa, and they are faithful Christians. So we can learn from their way of their belief, their worship to God, their community, their intercultural meetings on Sunday. So I think for the coming decade in the Netherlands, we should have an eye not only for the traditional Reformed churches and Christians, but also for the migrants that are coming to our country.
Yeah, what a wonderful attitude that is. And my prayer would be that attitude would also be reflected here in the United States towards the immigrants that come to our country. I think we can learn a lot from you. One last question. What do you see in the next 5 years of your Christian walk? Well, how is God leading you? And we'll talk about your ministry in a second session, but how is God leading your walk in as you think about the next 5 years?
Well, I feel blessed during my whole life with a good health. and a loving, full family. So God has given me the ability to invest in our ministry of Wake Up Deborah. And I'm looking forward, and I feel an urgency that much more people worldwide are starting to pray for the next generation. And I'm not having an agenda or a plan or a strategy, but I have a calling to start with sharing the ministry and inspiring people and equip them with how to start with it.
Well, we're very encouraged, and in our next segment, we will talk about the details of that. I think you're an inspiration to a lot of people. I know that you had a gathering of 500, 600, 700 Ukrainian refugees in your town here a couple of weeks ago, and so you and those that you're associated with are really reaching out in some very, very special ways, and we thank you for that. So with that, we will hear more from you. But I thank you for the life that God has given you and the direction that He has and the leadership skills that He's blessed you with. Jim, you got any other questions?
No, it's fascinating to hear how God is moving in the Netherlands, Saskia. I appreciate you sharing that. We have on our another podcast, we interviewed an evangelist from the Netherlands and talked about some incredible things that God is doing. And it's great to know that God is alive and well on the European continent. But Saskia, thanks for being with us on iRetire4Him. We'll be right back with more in segment 3. Every iRetire4Him show goes so quickly we don't often get to remind you that there are 2 resources you should be checking out right now. I recommend that you get a copy of the Retirement Reformation book and the iRetire4Him book. Retirement Reformation focuses on the mindset and behavioral changes needed, let's just say paradigm shifting, that is needed to live out your faith in retirement. iRetire4Him is focused on many of the ways you can put your faith into action by investing your life into others in your retirement years. Get both at the Retirement Reformation website in the bookstore, retirementreformation.org. That's retirementreformation.org. Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation, online, retirementreformation.org. We're talking about solutions to loneliness in retirement. And please pay close attention because we're going to really give you some great ideas here in this last segment of our podcast today. Bruce, what's a great scripture we could start off on today in this third segment of our podcast? When we're feeling lonely, what's a great scripture to go to?
You can go to any number of the Psalms. And in fact, David felt that great loneliness. And so the Psalms or the parts of the Psalms. We'll go to the part of Psalm 119 where, this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice in it. To always be reminded that there is an opportunity to rejoice in our relationship and what He's called us to do. So the Psalms, the basics. There are some wonderful songs that come from our childhood, perhaps, that can give us encouragement. And then to know, because what is it that sets us free? What is it that sets us free from lots of things, but what is it that sets us free from loneliness? The truth sets us free.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we know that truth, and we go to John 15:16, as we do in the Retirement Reformation often, where and before we get to that 16th verse, just prior to that, where Jesus says, I call you friend. You are no longer a servant because you know my Father's business. I am doing my Father, and you know that. That's an activity. And I call you friend. So when you have a friend, you can't be very lonely. So you got to make sure you got that friend. Well, then what does that friend say? He says, love your neighbor. Whoa. If I'm lonely and I step outside to love my neighbor, that loneliness will start to disappear. And then he says, guess what? I chose you. Oh my goodness. Somebody cared enough. Do you remember the old game, Red Rover?
Yeah.
Let somebody come over. Remember that? Dumb game. But at any rate.
Broken arms, broken necks.
Arms. Yeah. And absolutely. But the way that was usually set up was that, you had 2 captains and they chose teams. And so if you remember the feeling when you were chosen, oh my goodness, he cares. He thinks I'm important or big or fast or whatever. Well, here Jesus is saying, I chose you. I didn't just pull a number out of a hat. I didn't just let it, but I actually chose you. And then I prepared. Oh my goodness, I'm prepared for something. Oh dear. And what's the result of that preparation? Oh my goodness, it's bearing fruit that will last. So, wow, I've chosen, I'm prepared. There is fruit for me to bear that is already outlined. I'm unique and special. When those thoughts are the ones that capture your attention. Oh, and then he says at the end of that, oh, and by the way, do not forget to love your neighbor. And so when your focus is on those things, it is outside of you, and that loneliness then is diminished and can wash away.
What a great example. And there's so many great examples of our biblical patriarchs who were struggling with loneliness. Imagine how lonely Noah felt for 100 years building a boat in the middle of a desert.
And he didn't have a swimming suit.
And Paul in prison. And honestly, Jesus on mission where nobody really understood what he was trying to do. I mean, there's so many examples. Moses, 40 years in the desert. So many, but examples of people who just learned to grow close to God. Bruce, we talked in the last podcast about how loneliness can lead to medical issues, but dealing with our medical issues can eliminate loneliness as we take care of some of the things that are slowing us down and keeping us from being with other people. And some of us also who have retired from work, going back to work can also eliminate loneliness as we go back. Maybe it's not to go do the same thing you did before. Maybe it's not because you need a paycheck. Maybe it's because you just want to make some friends or pour into other people. But going back to work can eliminate some of that loneliness. It's really important that, when you're feeling lonely, often it leads to depression. The greatest way, and you've already stated this, the greatest way to get rid of depression in your life is to go serve somebody else. And Bruce, that's where I want us to end our podcast today, talking about retirement reformation small groups. Talk to us about how the listeners on to our podcast today can start a small group focused on retirement reformation right there in their church.
In any church, regardless of size, there will be 3 to 10 couples that when they hear this message in some fashion, whether because they read the book or whatever the reason, they hear a podcast, tell you what we're talking about, whatever, who say, I do believe that God has something more for me, and I really want to discover what that is. And so are ready to be intentional about a process to go through that discovery and to come out the other end. And then to be able to go through that discovery process in community. And so the small group allows 3, 4, 5, 6 couples or individuals, say up to 10 or 11, meeting together on a regular basis with a coach, going through the material to answer the question, how has God prepared me? And then to be able to connect that with the needs of our community, needs of our families, needs of our church, and to be able to step into that and to finish a process with a plan in place. One of the things, Jim, that I've realized is that, when people are asked what are they going to do in retirement and they come up with nothing, nothing doesn't require a plan. Therefore, they have no plan in place. But in fact, when you do have a plan, you got a track to run on. It'd be kind of like, when I was in Europe a couple of weeks ago and used Waze as a director, it was fantastic. I was going through the town of Bruges, these little streets and back alleys and so on. And it was telling me turn right, turn left, do that. I was just so relieved that I had a support system that could guide me to where I needed to go in times where I would have been just totally confused. Same issue here. And to be able to do that in community, I think the shackles that will release, the freedom that will bring, and the expectant joy of what is next for me will just be, just be tremendous. That's the heart of the small group of recreating retirement. And it's about 10, 11-week study. And it takes some serious work. But wow, the result is fantastic.
retirementreformation.org. Go to resources, check out books. There's so many different things that you can get out there, and sign the manifesto. Make the commitment to turning your retirement right side up. Bruce Brynsma, great conversation today on the solutions for loneliness in our retirement. And next time we get together, we're going to talk about loneliness versus solitude. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Jim. I'm glad we're together.
Yeah, I'm glad we're together as well. You've been listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation's own founder, Bruce Brynsma. We're Christ followers journeying from retirement to reformation, so we can ultimately say, I retire for Him.
I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation founder, Bruce Brynsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.